up. So thank you everybody who's here. Just to give a very brief introduction, this is a workshop to give us a chance to look back at our strategic risk framework once again. It's about 12 months since we looked at it in detail. And since then, we've actually had Kim come onto the team and with a fresh pair of eyes and some great new ideas about how we can move forward on this. So Kim's been doing a lot of work on refreshing the risk framework, not throwing out the work that's been done, but building on the work that's been done and seeing how we can build on it and strengthen our approach to strategic risk going forward. So this workshop is really a chance for us to catch up on the work that the staff have been doing, and then maybe ideally, if we were all in the same room, we would have had a bit more interaction and we would have been able to maybe give the staff a bit more of a steer. But because of the context today, we've changed some of this so that it's going to be a bit more of a briefing style, bringing you up to speed on the work that the staff have been doing and give you some of the direction of where we're going to be going to next. Hopefully we'll still be able to have some good discussion, but we're realistic about, exactly how that might be compared to all of us being in a room together. So Kim, I'm handing it over to you. Thank you so much for the work that you've done on short notice to kind of tailor this to a more online alert level 4 friendly document, and for the work you've done so far getting this this work on the risk framework up and running. Do you want to take us on a journey?
Kia ora, Councillor Condi, thank you so much. Yes, tēnā koutou katoa, councillors and Audit and Risk Subcommittee members. It's great to have you here along today, and as Councillor Condi said, we did have a pretty engaging and interactive workshop planned for you all this afternoon if we were all in the same room, with quite a few activities, and unfortunately most of that's gone out the window a bit. So nā mai haere mai, kia te kōrero. I'm sorry it's going to be quite a lot of me talking, but I hope we will be able to do some interactive chat at least anyway. So how this is going to go today, I'll just get the presentation up, and I'm assuming you can all see the presentation now. Yeah. Give me a thumbs up. Great. Thank you. So today it's really a quick tour through what we've been doing to date and showing some of the results. So a little bit of a refresher on why we think about strategic risks and how we think about strategic risks at the council. So some context setting just to revisit what we mean by strategic risks and how we look at them. And then I will be summarising the ELT risk assessments to date. We were hoping to do that as more of a moderation, a review with you, and we would still like to do this in the future, but for today, given the Zoom style, it's just not going to be practical. And then we'll try and have that bit more of the chat session if we can, led by Councillor Condi, around a little bit about our reporting in the future and how we do that, and how we're talking to you about risk in various committees as well as the Audit and Risk Subcommittee. So I'll just set the scene, and apologies in advance, as there's going to be quite a lot of me talking. So what I'd like to say is if you have a burning question that comes up while I'm chatting, if you could just note it down, and then we'll try and keep the flow going because it's probably going to be quite long of me talking, so I'll try and keep it going. But if you have a burning question, note it down, and then I'll stop at a point and we can put it into the chat if I haven't covered it yet. So I've got quite a lot, I think, covered. So hopefully your question will be answered as we go. So hang on to it though, and if I don't get to it, please feel free to put it in the chat when we get, I think before the risk reporting discussion might be a time to cover off anything you think missing.
And feel free to use the raise hand button on the reactions as well, and I can keep a note from here.
Awesome, thank you so much.
This presentation was sent out the night last night at 6:30, so if you're looking for an email version, you do have one.
Yeah, it has one typo, but please ignore that. It's been a bit of a scramble. So I will start off by setting the scene a little bit and just saying why we do risk assessment. And it's not really about precision or scoring, having the exact rating for every risk that we have to consider at the council. It's really about us understanding what drives risk, what makes risk, and what could happen to stop us achieving our big strategic outcomes and objectives. So the idea of risk assessment is really part of a decision-making process. It's not an end in itself. We don't just assess our risks, have a register and say, okay, we're good now. So the risk assessment should really be valuable for decision makers and for monitoring and reporting. So that's fundamental to what we're showing you today, is that it really should be valuable for you as governance and also for the people making the decisions about how we manage the risk. We do follow an international standard. It's an approach that's based on a New Zealand standard. It's pretty straightforward, and there's a variety of ways you can implement it. And we do try to bring it as much evidence-based as we can, subject matter expertise, historical events, experience from our overseas and local partners as well. There's some principles behind the strategic risks as separate to our operational risks here at the council. And really we're looking, when we talk about risk, it's the really pure definition is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And that's quite a vague statement. What does it mean? But what are our objectives? We're a local government agency, we're a council. So our objectives are really about those core services we have to deliver as a local government agency, but also about our big strategic vision and outcomes and our priorities. So those are our big picture outcomes and objectives that we work towards. And the strategic risks are those things that could actually just stop us from functioning and delivering these things or affect how we do our outcomes and objectives. So that's a really big picture for this. And they could arise from external things as we're experiencing right now, and internal things that actually we have a bit more control over in the council, really. So that comes into play when we talk about how we manage them. And we want to acknowledge that these big external risks can actually affect our whole city and our environment. We're not divorced from that. We're part of that environment. So even though we're only responsible for the things that the council can control or influence, or that's within our ambit, we're not in a vacuum. So when our city is affected and when our people are affected, that affects us as well, and it affects our ability to deliver or how we can actually perform our services. So just keeping that in mind in terms of it's really important for can we do our job and can we keep our function. Now, some of you, or most of you, I think will probably be quite familiar with the framework that we've been using to date. It's been really great as we started our risk maturity journey to have a standardised risk framework. It's a standard business type framework that works really well, clear, likelihood, consequence scale, a range of categories. But what's happened over the years that you've been looking at strategic risks at subcommittees and at the council is that the conversations kind of developed with the leadership team and with the councillors. So you're asking more questions about the nature of the risks, what it means for the city, what it means for our ability to deliver. And the current framework we've got isn't quite helping to answer those questions. So we've looked at the framework and said, how can we make it more about what a council does rather than, say, a bank does? So making it reflect the functions and the requirements of the council to deliver as a public service agency. So I've looked at that and we've made a few changes and kept stuff that's working well. So what's staying the same is that we're still using likelihood and consequence to describe our risk. We'll keep the matrix, we'll keep the framework. We'll keep the same likelihood scale because it ties in with our annual plan and long-term planning cycle. And we'll keep the four steps. It seems some people use 5. There's no right or wrong about it. The good thing about 4 or 6 is no one can sit in the middle when you're saying how bad it is. But there's no right or wrong there. But because it's what we've been using, there's no real reason to change that. And we'll still get the leadership team to kind of have their first pass on the risks and then bring them to you. So what we have changed is, as I said, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is really looked at how we're measuring consequences to our council and what that means for our delivery. So we've expanded this a bit, and I'll talk to this a bit more in a minute. We've also kind of tweaked the terminology a bit just to be a little bit clearer around what's the difference between a consequence and a risk and that sort of thing. and thinking about scenario approach. So it helps to people to visualize when they're doing the risk assessment what it really means, how bad it could be. You know, it's a good way to think about risk, and it's quite a standard approach. We've looked at what other councils are doing and what other government agencies are doing to have that kind of public service lens, so we can see, reflect a little bit more about what it means to be a council. And I'm sorry, it's a little bit mathsy, but I'll show it a bit later. We've got a way of summing up the consequences that doesn't average it down if you get a whole lot of minor consequences in one big deal. We don't want to say that everything that has a severe consequence all sits at the same level, but at the same time, we don't want things to be averaged down. Hopefully that'll become clearer when I show you a worked example. But right now, I know that's a lot of talking for the start. I just want to do a check-in and make sure that's all clear. So if people could do any kind of, I don't know if you can do a thumbs up on Zoom or just a yes or whatever. Good, Linda's all good. I can't see everybody else, sorry.
I know, I saw thumbs up from Linda and Roy. I certainly haven't had any hands raised asking questions.
Great, thank you. I'll just keep barreling on.
I think keep going.
Okay, great. So now to how we actually use the new framework. So this is what we've been doing with the leadership team in the last few weeks. So we've been going to them with some scenarios for a range of threats that are kind of on our long list of threats, and developing these scenarios to help them to describe the likelihood and consequence of these big events. And we're looking at the kind of maximum reasonable, the maximum credible, what's the big things that could really affect us. And if you look at the maximum credible, then you've always kind of looking at, have we got everything in place we need, or how bad it could be, and then you've kind of covered the smaller scales as well. So the councils determine the likelihood and the consequences based on these scenarios for the threats that we've looking at. And then we've added a new thing, which is a confidence level. And what that means is, how confident are we about the kind of risk rating that we've created? So that could be because we don't have enough information, or there's a really wide range of uncertainty in the scenario, or how it might affect people or our organisation. So if we're not incredibly confident, or if we've got a low confidence, it might be a trigger for getting more information, or talking to other people who've been through the same kind of threat, or just building up our information before you make any really big risk management decisions. So some things we actually have a really large body of evidence. For example, earthquake threats, we know a lot about the impacts of earthquakes. Some things there's less information available. So here's the long list of threats that we've got, that we're working our way through. And there's 13 all up, and we will do all of them eventually. That's the intention with the leadership team. And what we've done is we've done about half of them to date. So we've looked at cyber attack and a malicious attack. We've looked at a smaller natural hazard event, not the large earthquake scenario, but a smaller one, what it means for us. Internal ones like fraud and poor planning and prioritisation. And we've also looked at a really tricky problem, which is kind of supply chain and contractor issues. So that's the ones we've assessed to date. And we've done them against a full range of consequences for every threat. And I'll just show you what that means. So you can see the other ones we've got on the list. And of course, COVID-19, which is really relevant at the moment, is on there. What we had hoped to do today, and I'm really sorry we couldn't do this in the Zoom environment, was to work through the earthquake and tsunami scenario with you, so you could do a risk assessment with us using this method and feel how it is. But in the Zoom environment, it's just not able to get the great interaction we'd like from you. So hopefully when we all get back together in person, we can work through some of these so you feel more familiar and comfortable with the approach. All right, so here's the new consequence categories. I sent you that incredibly busy table, which you may or may not have had a chance to look at. That is our new consequence rating system. So what this means is that we are looking at a wide range of impacts to our city and our organisation and what that means on our ability to deliver on our everyday work and our strategic outcomes for each of these threats. So, for example, for a cyber attack, will it affect democracy and governance? Will it affect the health and safety of our people? So this is a little bit extended on what we had before, and I'll just quickly touch on why some of the new things are in there. So the first one that you might see is something quite unusual for a risk assessment consequence table is democracy and governance, but I have seen it used at the national level. And it's really about our role as a council in providing the opportunity for people to be involved in local body politics and in government. Our ability to make decisions, or for you as elected members to make decisions, and the ability for public to vote, participate, be consulted, to show we are performing our governance role, and it's really important. Partnerships and relationships is a new area there. It's critical for things like our relationships with mana whenua, CCOs, and other things. Could these things be effective? They're really integral to helping us deliver our programs. We've split up critical services and our wellbeing services. So critical services, what must we do to support the city under legislation or for public health and safety? And then the wellbeing services, the things we do, such as support recreation, sport, arts and culture, libraries, that sort of service. And then significant projects and programs is also a new one in there. It's as a consequence, I think. It's the vehicle by which we deliver towards a lot of strategic outcomes and objectives. So it could be that one specific project is impacted, but in the strategic risk framework, does that one project really affect our overall outcomes and objectives, or is it quite a localised thing? So that's the kind of lens we're putting on that. The other thing that's new in here, I see there's a few questions, so I'll just pause after I finish this. The other thing that's really new in here is probably the capability and capacity of staff, and that's around our workforce, not just the health and safety, but this one's more about, do we have the expertise and do we have the quantum of people to do the work? And then a couple of other things, our critical assets, the physical condition of them, and our data, information and tools, which if we didn't have the systems we're using today, we wouldn't be able to actually meet during a COVID lockdown and continue to support the role that you play. So this is pretty important as well. I'll just check in on the chat and see if there's...
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions that have come through. One, a couple of discussions about the fact that we haven't got to reassessing the pandemic response yet. And I guess I just wanted to make the comment, Kim, that I think for some of these, it's not that we have no assessment, it's that we're reassessing them under this new framework. Would that be correct?
That is correct. So previously we had COVID, earthquake, and I think it was cyber attack all grouped together as external shocks. And we had a kind of a few consequences that could result of those things, such as people's health or financial loss, or maybe we couldn't perform our regulatory function. But now what we've done is split each of them out and look at them independently against this full range of consequences. And yes, absolutely, we will be doing COVID as well. And that doesn't mean we haven't been thinking about and planning for COVID. What the risk assessment might do is expose some other areas where there's more opportunity for managing the risk, or things we haven't thought about in terms of some of those consequences that we haven't quite got to yet. So clearly we're pretty experienced at setting up these meetings from last year, but there could be other things. Perhaps the scenario we're going to use is actually for an outbreak in Wellington rather than just a lockdown. So there could be new things we need to think about there. So we can bring that to the planning table.
Yeah. Diane, if you're available, I was going to come to you with your question about the number of consequence categories, because I think it's a good one. Iona, I see your question in the chat. We're coming to that, so I might just hold you over until we get to those slides. And after Diane, I'll come to Andy, who's got his hand up.
Okay, the first one was about the number of categories.
Yeah. Oh, look, I suppose my overall comment from that, and then I noticed Councillor Condi's comment that it is internally focused. I suppose one of the things I'm looking for there's two aspects here from a governance perspective. One is making sure that the organisation has an appropriate risk management framework. So there's an assurance aspect. And then the other part of it is that we as governors are very clear about what the strategic risks to the organizations are, which ones that we are effectively managing ourselves. So I see this, there's two purposes here. Oh, well, I'm not sure with your workshop or where it's going, but to me, that's what it is. So there's the detail in terms of the framework, overall framework, that whether you're in a governing role or you're in a management, senior management, or a frontline worker role. But then there's also the particular roles of governance in here. So I'm looking to be able to get clarity around that, and I'm looking to get clarity around the governance working with senior leaders in terms of making sure that we are all clear on what our strategic risks are. That's all.
Thanks. I didn't turn my mic off, did I?
Thanks, Dan. That's all right. Do you have a response for that, Kim?
For part of it, I think, and part of it, I think, will come out when we talk about the reporting and accountability stuff at the end. So that's more about the role of governance and the role of the executive leadership team. Yep. So I think, Councillor Young, what you're asking for is about how this links to the risk management as well. So the idea of taking such a broad approach and looking at all these impacts is to actually see where are the things that council is responsible for and can change, and where are the things that are actually outside our sphere of influence or outside our responsibility as well. But it's acknowledging these impacts are happening, and then when we talk about the risk management, what is our role? So for example, if we were talking about earthquake risk, we have many roles to play in reducing earthquake risk to Wellington. Some of them are through land use planning, some of them are through our building and compliance, some of them are through preparing for emergency response, some are through protecting our own assets. So these are all part of our risk management, and they'll be reported and handled in different ways to the governance. So when we come to talk about the governance, I think that's more about how will you feel assured that the many ways we're managing these big risks, which will affect us as an organisation, but also affect our city, and we're not kind of immune from the effects on the city and how we can perform our functions and our roles. So how are we getting that information to you through our various channels? And I think that's where the conversation will go a bit later.
Hopefully.
I suppose I just have a slightly different view on governance, and I just want to make sure that it is in line, governance in terms of over risk is in line with sort of some guidelines put out by the Institute of Directors of how you might expect a board of directors to manage risk as well.
That's definitely on the agenda for later in the workshop, Diane, so we'll come to that, and hopefully it will address some of those concerns. If not, we can come back to it. Councillor Paul, I see your question about solutions, and we definitely are going to be coming to those as we get a bit further along. Andy, are you with us? I see you've got your hand up, but I don't see you on screen. There you are, yes.
Saving screen space.
Yes, lovely.
Yeah, look, a question I've got, you said, Kim, that was, I can't remember the date you had there, but it was certainly August, there's something for an assessment about that ability to deliver projects and programs. And obviously that's a huge one across the country, particularly in the construction space. And I just wondered, A, what conclusions you'd come to, and B, what the answers might be, because that is a space which I think there's some real decisions that we might need to make. It kind of in a way fits with Tamitha's question, although that may or may not be about policy as opposed to actual delivery of structural projects, but it's pertinent for both. But yeah, this is a big issue for everybody in trying to deliver massive capital projects all at once and bidding prices up and shortage of everything.
Now, I'm going to jump in before I hand it to Kim and just say that this workshop is not really for us discussing specific risks. It's for us to look at the overall framework and make sure that we understand that, because I think what we're going to come to is the role that the various committees have in terms of looking at these risks, not just the Audit and Risk Committee, but for example, the risk you've just named, Andy, about the deliverability of our capital program is one that the Infrastructure Committee should be keeping a close eye on, and how do we work those governance roles together. That said, I'll hand you over to Kim for a brief answer.
I'll try to keep it brief. Yes, we did workshop that with the ELT, and the intention today was to bring the results in detail of all the work, all the assessments, so you could have a look at them. But in the Zoom environment, it's just too hard for you to have that rich interrogation and conversation about it. So we will be bringing those to you. But for today, because I didn't want to be talking ad infinitum through every scenario, I've just really given you the overview of the assessment, which I'm coming to soon, and then we're looking at one in detail just so you can see a bit of the rationale.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to seeing that in the near future then.
You may not say that when the results come up.
I've got some ideas. Yeah, thanks.
All right, Kim, I think we're good to press on.
Okay, so I'm aware I shared with you a very difficult to read document, but really all I want to say today is about this document here is this is the standardized way we are trying to remove, I guess, a lot of personal bias about what's important or what's the most important in terms of the level of impact, not necessarily what's the most important risk we want to actually manage, but it's really to help frame the thinking. So if we're saying, is this really a severe or is this really a major impact on our strategic objectives and outcomes and our ability to deliver for Wellington? So all of the consequences that I've talked about are listed along the left, down the left-hand column with a little bit of explanation. And then we've got a kind of a standardized step between each consequence level and a bit of explanation in each of those boxes to help guide the thinking, but we can't cover every possibility. So really the coloured lines that are along the top are really the kind of generic, will this actually be a big deal for our council and our strategic objectives or our strategic function? And so that's probably all I need to say about this one. It's pretty busy, but the ELT have been using it and using it well to do their assessments. And another thing that we've developed, now this is absolutely dummy data, it hasn't got all the real assessments in it at the moment, just to be clear, is a visualization tool. So this is really just a way of capturing all the information. And what it does is it's got all the threats that we're looking at across the top. So you can look down each threat and say, what's the overall risk of this? What's the impact? And then you can also look across each of the consequences. What are the things we really care about? Where are our vulnerabilities? For example, if we find the same thing, such as our data and information is getting hammered by multiple threats, is there something there more we could be doing, because that might be a clear vulnerability? So this is a visualization tool we're just using to capture the assessments as we go, and also to record the rationale behind why the ratings are given as they are. So now we come to the results of the first risk assessments we've done with the ELT. So this is how it's looking at the moment. As you can see, it's we've got some pretty high risks in here, some up in the extreme category. So you can see that the planning and prioritisation one and the supply shortage one are both right up there in the top. What's different about those, I guess, in terms of risk management, is one we have a lot more control over as a council, and it's already been very strongly considered. This, of course, remember, these are all based on worst case scenarios. So if we don't get it right, this is how bad it could be, but we absolutely know this is a risk to us. And so what we're doing now is saying, what can we do about it as a council? And that's where the risk management comes into play. So this is the worst case scenario. If we don't get it right, and clearly we've got a goal to remediate some of those risks that are within our control. So that's the summary for now. So I don't know if that would have given you much comfort, I'm sorry. So these are the ones we've got for now. So I'll just look into one in a bit more detail, and that's the cyber attack one. So how did we get to such a high rating with cyber attack? And the scenario for this is a successful cyber attack. So you're probably aware that cyber attacks are happening throughout New Zealand and the world constantly, and most are unsuccessful. But there is a chance in the next 1 to 3 years that we could have a serious cyber attack breach. And we know that that could happen. So what we're doing now is saying, what would it mean for us and what can we do about it? So this is the rating and the rationale from your executive leadership team in terms of what do they think the consequences will be for us and what's the likelihood. So the important thing here is that when we put the rationale in for why we think it will be a big deal or maybe not so significant, we can also start recording, well, what can we actually do about it? Is this helping us to explore? So for things like if we lose all our systems, we wouldn't be having this meeting today, and that would be really difficult. But democracy services know that there's other ways that they can involve you as councillors for decision making, but the public participation part of the shop is not so easy to achieve if we lose our online systems. Likewise, we could have real problems with building consents and limbs and things like that, which might mean we be in breach of the law. Other things we can probably still go in terms of our big strategic functions and objectives. Would it really stop us delivering what we need to as a council? Lots of our big projects and programs are run externally. Probably wouldn't affect staff well-being too much. So those kind of things. So this is the rationale, and we've done this with each of the threats we've assessed so far. Just checking in because I can see there's a question as well. Oh, thanks, Mayor Andy. We're only focusing on the cyber today just to give you a feel for how it works in action. Obviously, this is a really significant threat and not one that the council is taking lightly. We know about it. We're working on it right now. And the best bang for the buck for all these types of malicious attacks is really to try and prevent them before they happen. We can try and work on the consequences, but what our IT team and cyber team are doing lots of work on changing that likelihood by increasing security and patching those systems. But we can't really talk too much about that in a public forum because it's all things that we do to keep us secure. Now, I think that's almost where we get to the end of the overview. So I'd just like to pause now, I guess, and hand over to Councillor Condi to start the conversation, I guess, about how, but if you've got burning questions, now might be the time to put them up or raise your hand or whatever about the methods or the assessments we've done so far. Obviously, we're really keen to share those with you when we can get together and talk about them more.
Particularly just Iona and Tam, if either of you, Iona, we've talked a little bit about how we prioritise these, so you can kind of see now how we look at which ones are more severe, but if you've got a question about that, now would be a good time. And same, Tam, we've talked a little bit about how we can start looking at solutions, that there's still more coming in the presentation. Is there anybody else? Tam?
I'll just wait till later on in the presentation. Thanks, Jenny.
Cool, thanks. Iona?
Thank you, Jenny. Look, I guess what I'm just finding a bit tricky is that it just seems there's so many risks there, which, is fair enough because we do quite a lot and we have such wide powers and interests as an organisation. But I do think they need some weighting. So a cyber attack is obviously very serious, but it's not as serious as climate change or earthquakes are a massive threat. I just think we have stopped taking that quite so seriously now that we've got some other crises to be managing. And also, I did ask the planner the other day in our district plan working group about the optimism bias. You know about that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel that we're quite good at that. That we are not. This is not about being negative. I like to be positive, but about being realistic about the many risks that we do face and the very serious consequences. And obviously, we're in a pandemic. It's and I just, with some institutional knowledge, I don't think we ever took the pandemic as seriously as we took some of the other things. And then here it's come along and had a big impact. So I guess I'm just interested to make sure that we are taking some of these things really seriously and that we do have a much sort of clearer way than what I've seen so far about weighting them and prioritising them, whilst of course not saying that some of these things are unimportant, because they're not.
Yeah, so that's a conversation that I guess in traditional risk management process usually does happen after the assessment. So you assess the risks for what they are, but then the evaluation part is really in which things are our priorities and which things do we tolerate and where do we want to focus. Because, for example, just because something's up in that top right, like supply chain, we have limited capability to change global shipping and things like that. So even if it's in our highest red, it might not be our priority, even though the impact is really severe if it doesn't get alleviated. And likewise, something could be lower on that matrix. The matrix is really a visualization tool, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be a priority for how we make decisions, because we align our decisions with the things that we care about and that the leadership team prioritize. So the risk management decisions don't have to be wedded to the exact scores that we get in any kind of assessment. That's just for us to recognize, here's the consequences, here's the impacts, this is what it means for us, and now what decisions do the leadership and do the governance want to make. So it's really the information that can assist you with those decisions about what our priorities are. Similarly with the climate change one, we haven't done that assessment yet, and our thread is listed as our poor planning for either mitigation and adaptation for climate change. And really where that will come out is in what is within our control as a council and what does it mean for us as a council, because we're not the only ones responsible for climate change response in Wellington. So, but that's one that we will be bringing our subject matter experts on board as well from the climate change team to assist with that assessment. But then the decision making about what we do about it is another step on from the assessment. The assessment just helps with that process.
Thanks for that. And can I just ask one more question, which is, so in 2027, half of our buildings are supposed to be earthquake strengthened. I don't see how that's going to happen. So, and I know it's not all of our responsibility, but nevertheless, we're a city as a whole. What does this mean in practice about how we monitor that risk? So in other words, building owners are going to be not complying with the law. And when there is an earthquake, like if it is reasonably soon, there will be a serious consequence. So how would we apply that to a problem like that?
Well, I think for the earthquake scenario, there's no doubt it will be quite a devastating event, even with earthquake strengthening. I think we can't remove all risk and you can't design your way out of all risk for an earthquake. I think we can really look at the things that are within council control and our role in encouragement. There's many other ways we can try and reduce earthquake risk to the city, I suppose, but we have a role as a regulator. We have a role with checking that buildings are built on soft soils in the correct way and things like that, but I don't think we can take on all risk. The government, private sector, they all have a responsibility. So I don't think we're not going to ignore the fact that an earthquake could be very serious for Wellington if those people don't comply. But what we would be tracking in our risk management is what things are in our control and what things are outside our control, and what we can do about the things that are outside our control. What opportunities do we have and how will we report those? And I guess we're kind of moving into the reporting and accountability conversation now too, because that a lot of the things you're talking about might actually be discussed at, say, the infrastructure committee, if you're talking specifically about earthquake-prone buildings. But maybe Councillor Condi, you might have some thoughts on this.
Yes, apologies if you can hear my 5-year-old in the background. He's stomping up and down the corridor outside the room. It's just getting to that time of day after a whole day inside. Yeah, I think it was really helpful actually to kind of get that differentiation between assessment and valuation, because I don't think that I've ever quite had that we might assess a risk as being really severe, but it may not, when we evaluate it, it may not be much within our control, and so therefore it might not be a priority to respond to. So I think that's kind of helpful to start thinking about some of those things. Really what we wanted to talk about here is starting to think about the role of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee compared to the roles of the other committees. the Audit and Risk Subcommittee needs to get kind of the overall reporting on all the risks and the strategic risks, and be confident that as governors, we're all across all of these things, but it's not just the Audit and Risk Subcommittee's role. That's really where we're getting to it. And so we wanted to start thinking about, what would the role of other council committees and subcommittees be in terms of some of these strategic risks. Some of the committees, like the Infrastructure Committee, has an obvious link to the deliverability of our capital program, so I come back to that one a lot. But there'll be a number of these other risks will clearly fall within a specific committee's remit. And so we wanted to start thinking about how we might report on those things back to those committees and what might work. And this is then coming into the questions that you were raising, Diane, about the governance role, and making sure that that all of us across the council are covering off our governance role around risk, not just thinking that the Audit and Risk Committee subcommittee have us covered, but that it's something that is happening right across all the committees. So Kim, that's just a kind of bit of an introduction. Do you want to take us through kind of where you've gotten to in the early stages of thinking about the reporting?
Yeah, unfortunately we had a really great activity planned for this as well, which is really not possible on the Zoom, to try and to get your input of where you think the reporting and accountability lies, and where various risk management, where you think you'd be hearing about it. So I haven't been able to introduce that today. It was it's just not really possible over Zoom. But what we have been thinking about is capturing all the ways that we manage risk. For example, as you say, our Councillor Pannett, our earthquake-prone building program for our own buildings, and then how we regulate how others are doing it, or then other things we're doing, such as tsunami evacuation planning or whatever. So how we capture all those and how they're reported, and then which information comes up to audit and risk and which is reported through other ways, and how we don't duplicate but we complement and make sure that there is that assurance for the folk who do sit on the Audit and Risk Committee who aren't actually sitting on the council, other council committees, because we have independent people on those as well, so that they feel that they know those reporting channels are aligned. So for now, I haven't got much to show, except that we're looking at how we do the reporting. And am I still sharing? I think I am. And so the approach that we're looking at is actually having a developed risk profile for each of the threats we look at, and also kind of a dashboard reporting. So the profiles will have much more of the detail around the risk assessment and those accountability and reporting channels, and where you would be expecting to hear about how this risk is being managed. We'd also be looking at, is the status of the risk changing? Are there trends happening, say, climate change influences or population influences that is changing the risk? What activities is the council doing? What advocacy are we doing if we can't actually change the risks ourselves? And then where do we want the risk to be? What's our comfort level? What's our tolerance for this risk? So what's our target? So at this point, I've got a draft template that I'm still working on. We'll be working with ELT to make sure we get the right kind of information. And then we'll have a dashboard as well. I think that summarises things. So both will be available to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, but I imagine the profiles won't change overly quickly. There'll just be sort of exception things changing on there, but the dashboard will kind of be a way to keep up to speed as well. Just seeing a bit of a chat. Top-down view. Okay, Councillor Calvert. Perhaps you think there might be a risk that we're missing, or could you elaborate on your question? You're saying you would like to see more of a top-down view on the risks. So
I'd like to see another. I mean, I think this approach is very. It's very process orientated. It's great because then you can fill in the gaps. But I think there's an opportunity to take it right from the governance level and senior leadership team level, and actually think about, and it comes to that sort of what keeps me awake at night. It's those really the really key things that come to mind, and maybe some of them may well be topical. So you've got to sort of smooth that out a bit. But then to say, well, if we take those, where do they fit in? How does that fit into the actual framework? And would they be captured?
Yeah.
Because I think if we can see something like that working, and I think to me it was a bit like how when we talked last week, we talked about the Ahutini strategy, and we looked at that strategy and it looked fine, so to speak. But then when we actually tested it against something that we had to make a strategic decision on for investment, when we looked at that, whether that was actually in the strategy that gave us the mandate, it wasn't there, which highlighted there was a gap in the actual strategy. So all I'm saying is it would be good to test this. Whilst you might test it from people in the organization, it will be good to test it from that governance, very senior leadership team, and say, okay, what keeps you awake at night? Are these things represented? Are they represented in the way that we might think they are? And and that gives us that sort of, I suppose, more holistic sense that it does meet everyone's needs.
Well, Diane, you might remember last year we did a workshop. The last risk workshop we had took that kind of approach. It sort of took us all into small groups, and we said that kind of what keeps us awake at night. Are we missing anything? Can you talk about how we've taken that previous work and how you've connected it to what you've done here?
Yeah, there was I think a big sticky note session. I think might be the one you're referring to, and I had all the documents from that. So I looked through all of those and I tried to incorporate them into the list of threats that we've developed now. So, for example, I think, I'm not sure if I can go backwards. The type of thing you might be talking about, Councillor Calvert, is things, it could be, I'm not quite clear on the exact problem. It could have been the poor financial planning or the poor planning, scoping and prioritisation. So these are the big way we talk about the threats, and what we're talking about is really the overall impact on our vision and our strategic outcomes. So if one particular strategy isn't fit for purpose, that could come up in here. But what is the, I guess, the big strategic outcome of that? So I guess if there's something that you think is particularly missing in terms of either threats or how we're talking about the consequences on what we're trying to achieve as a council, there's no reason why we can't add other things in terms of the what's keeping you awake at night. There is a way that they do it for the global risks survey, but as you say, it's very topical, quite perception based, and it does seem to change from year on year depending if there's been a big something anywhere in the world. But if you think there's some gaps here in what we're doing, we're happy to see if we can put them in terms of those big threats or those big consequences that we're not quite capturing.
Yeah, I think it was how it's treated, and I do recall that workshop, and then I won't go into details about that workshop. We could probably have a conversation about that offline.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't present for the workshop.
Yeah,
so,
no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Do we have other questions? Kim, if you can take us back to the slide with the reporting on it.
Yeah.
So just coming back to, I haven't forgotten you, Tam, you were asking about kind of solutions and when we start talking about solutions. And one of the things I do like about this reporting, Kim, is that it kind of has on this left-hand side, risk treatments, which is essentially what are our solutions, what are we doing? Can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, we have been doing that, I think, with the previous reporting. It was, but it was just a little bit harder to pick out the gold because it was quite a bulky document. So it's not that we haven't been reporting on how we're managing the risk. So I think this is designed to capture some of the big things we've got in play, but also where some of the risk management or treatments might be reported in other committees or subcommittees. So, for example, this is a really draft one that is not, I don't think it reflects the true nature of how we're managing the risk, put it this way. It's just an example to show you, but for example, the various committees, and then for the risk tracking and the outlook, is there something that means that this could change, but the risk treatments in place might be things like our key policies, say if it's a malicious attack, if you think someone might access our building, any structural things we do to buildings to make them safer, any policies or training, that sort of thing, and when we expect to see something that would actually change the risk. So we don't want to put every little bit of detail or every little bit of training I might do as a staff member, but things that we would record in here that we think will actually make a material difference to how this risk is tracking and what the impacts might be, whether it's changing the likelihood or whether it's changing what we might see in the consequences. So it's really trying to hit the mark with not bringing everybody down into the weeds, I suppose, of all our operational things, but making sure you feel that you're getting enough information that it is reflecting how we're managing the risk. So there's the treatments in place and getting that at the right level. Then there's the treatments that we have got planned or we expect to bring online, and then there might be some gaps or issues that we've identified and think, well, this is still a problem and we haven't quite got a solution for it yet. So what's next for this? So what more can we do?
Thanks, Kim. I think I'm conscious that we've gone a little bit over the hour that we were planning to on Zoom. So I think the last slide we have is just the next steps. And I guess the first thing I would say is I'm assuming, Kim, if people have feedback from the session that they haven't had a chance to share on Zoom, that an email to you is probably a good way going forward. If there's a threat you think needs to be added to the list, or you've got a question about the reporting or a suggestion.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I guess the other thing too is if we are going to be locked down for a while and we don't really know yet, and we aren't able to do those physical meetings where we could go through a lot more of this with you, coming up with a plan to share the other assessments with you so you can see the detail more as well. And then I'll be checking in with LT about the reporting, and then I'd like to check in with the members of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee as well to make sure that they're getting the information that they want. I see there's a chat.
Oh, Simon just has to go off to another meeting. Okay. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, so that doesn't provide you, I guess, with a lot of information about when we'll have all the risk assessments finished. Our timelines have kind of been a little bit disrupted by this because we were planning to work through a lot more of them with the executive leadership team, but I need to talk to them about what their priorities are now. I know they've got a lot of other things on their plate at the moment.
Yes. Obviously, as we all agree, the key priority will be looking at the COVID response, and we've heard that the ELT are going to be doing a lot of work on that over the next little while, which I'm sure all the councillors will be interested to follow and understand.
What I will be doing, I guess, in the meanwhile, while we assess those other risks, if we haven't got around to them, is for the ones we have assessed, is be drawing upon information from all my colleagues and also from the governors to populate those profiles to say, how are we managing the risk now? So we've got that reporting in place for the next Audit and Risk Subcommittee as much as I can get together before then. So to say, and this is how we are managing these risks.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting as well to think about the fact that we've got two external people. We know, Linda and Roy are with us right now, who are on Audit and Risk, who, as you say, they don't sit in all of those committee meetings. So it's about how do we give them reporting for them to feel confident. And I'm very conscious, of course, that I'm only temporarily in this chair because we're going to be appointing an independent chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and that person is going to need to feel like they have real confidence that the organisation is across and the governors are across all of these issues around risk, but that they won't be sitting all of those committee meetings. So, how we make sure that we're getting our reporting right that's coming to Audit and Risk at the right level, but as well, as I said before, particularly chairs of our new big four committees, thinking about, as the chair of your committee, are there strategic risks that you think your committee should be getting reporting on? And it's probably something that we need to meet as chairs and deputy chairs together and kind of talk about where we think things fit and how we want to deal with that. But this was kind of, one of the things we wanted this session to be was a chance for chairs and deputy chairs and everybody else to think about what kind of risk reporting do I want to see coming to those committees, and giving us a chance to sort of take risk out of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee and putting it into all of our committees as part of the journey that we're on. So I think that's probably something else that'll be a bit of a next step, is for us to think about as all the chairs and deputy chairs about how we want to see risk reporting fit into those. Are there any, just, I'm conscious that I've chaired the meeting a bit more heavy-handedly than I normally would just because we're on Zoom. So I do want to throw it out at the last moment just to say, is there anybody else who has a question or a comment or just wants to say something before we leave?
I just wanted to, just restate what you just said about the 2 external members. We're probably the most left out when it comes to information that the rest of you have heard in various committees. And I've struggled quite a lot with some of the risks, particularly the infrastructure and projects risk, which is significant, of which we have no reporting, no detail, and yet it is part of our mandate. So I'd be quite interested to see how Roy, myself and the new chair can perhaps get together and see how we can feel that we're getting all the information we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already been talking about, as the chair and deputy chair, about how we want to improve that reporting coming to infrastructure committee, and then how we're going to feed that on so that you feel confident as well. Yeah. And how we're going to make sure that we can use your skills in the infrastructure committee. So anybody else who would like to jump in before we go?
Roy, I think.
Roy, go right ahead.
You're on mute, Roy.
Okay, is that better? I wanted to make this comment right up front, that I was pleased to see that, Kim, you had used the vast amount of work that's been done before and updated it, because otherwise there's a temptation to start again. And you know, not only you, but ELT have done an awful lot of work. The other point I always make with risk management or risk matrices is it's a wonderful collection of information. Does it change anybody's behavior other than just looking at these risks and trying to solve them? Because it's a whole lot of information which should change people's behavior and the amount and the things that they discuss.
I think that the one thing I'd say to that is that actually probably the matrix in itself isn't the driver, it's the conversation you have as you're assessing the risks, that actually when people are talking about what does it mean and so what, and inevitably when you start doing the assessment, people also talk about what can we do about it as well. That does come up in the assessment process, or what are we doing now and what can we do about it. So I think it's really the process rather than the matrix itself. That's just a visual summary, and the process is where the goal is.
Yeah, okay, good answer. Yeah, thanks.
All right, good one. Thanks so much, team. I will wrap it up now. As I said, anybody who's got comments or more questions or suggestions, I'm sure that they would be welcome. As I said, we did want to have more of an interactive session today, so we really are keen to hear from you if you've got ideas about how you want to take this forward with next steps and conversations we need to keep having. But just want to once again say thank you to Kim for being very agile and responding to our quick change of circumstances. We appreciate that.
Well done. Very
well done. And again, thank you to those who are waiting for us for a few minutes as our previous meeting ran late. Thanks everybody for a good day of work, and for those of you who are on the schedule, we might see you again tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.